Hey there, ready to dive into something that might just reshape how you think about election?
Elections.
Yeah, we're talking redistricting,
Oh, okay.
but not the usual kind today. We're exploring a radical idea
Oh,
using watersheds,
watershed.
those natural regions where water flows to a common point as the building blocks for congressional districts.
That might sound a bit out there, but stick with us.
Okay.
What's so intriguing about this concept is that it taps into a philosophy called bioregionalism.
Bioregionalism.
The idea that we should organize our lives, including our political systems, around natural boundary.
Okay, I'm already hooked. But before we get ahead of ourselves,
Right.
let's make one thing crystal clear.
Sure.
We are not talking about redrawing state lines.
Okay.
We're focusing on those congressional districts within each state.
Got it.
It's about making those internal divisions more aligned with the natural world and, dare I say, a bit more fair.
Exactly. And to understand why this is so important, let's look at a pretty startling statistic.
Okay.
In the most recent election cycle, only a tiny fraction of races, something like 8% of congressional races, were actually competitive.
So basically, in most districts, the outcome is practically predetermined.
Pretty much.
That doesn't sound like a very healthy democracy.
Yeah, it's a sign of a system that's been rigged.
Rigged how?
Often through gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering?
Where politicians manipulate district boundaries to give their party an advantage.
Oh, I see.
They essentially carve up the electoral map like a pie, ensuring they get all the slices with the extra filling.
So how do watersheds fit into all of this? How can rivers and streams help us create a fairer system?
Think of it this way. Watersheds ignore political boundaries. They follow the natural flow of water, creating these interconnected regions that often encompass a mix of urban, rural, and suburban areas.
I see.
If we align our districts with these watersheds, it could make gerrymandering a whole lot harder.
Harder how?
You can't exactly manipulate the course of a river to favor one party over another.
Right. It's like taking away the politicians' crayons and replacing them with the unyielding forces of nature.
Exactly.
So instead of those weirdly shaped districts that snake across the map, we'd have these more natural, organically defined regions.
Exactly. And because watersheds tend to encompass such diverse communities, it could lead to more competitive elections. Candidates couldn't just cater to a narrow partisan base. They'd have to appeal to a broader range of interests and build coalitions that reflect the diversity of the watershed itself.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could shake things up.
Good.
But let's get into the nitty-gritty of how this would actually work.
Right.
What exactly are watersheds, and how do they translate into political districts?
Imagine a giant bathtub.
Okay.
All the land that drains into a particular river or stream is part of that watershed.
I see.
It's geographically defined. And it's a system we already use to manage water resources.
Okay.
In fact, the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, has this incredible tool called the Watershed Boundary Dataset, or WBD for short.
WBD.
Think of it like Google Maps, but for watersheds. It shows you exactly where water flows, creating this intricate web of interconnected regions across the entire country.
So we're not talking about some theoretical concept here.
Right.
This is grounded in real data in a system that's already in place.
Precisely, and it's constantly being updated.
Oh, wow.
The 2024 version of the WBD incorporates years of improvements, giving us a really precise picture of how watersheds are defined.
Okay.
You can actually go online, zoom in on your own neighborhood, and see which watershed you belong to.
You know what's fascinating about this?
What's that?
This idea of aligning ourselves with natural boundaries isn't entirely new.
You're right, John Wesley Powell.
John Wesley Powell.
The famous explorer who charted the Colorado River back in the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
Actually advocated for state boundaries based on watersheds.
Really?
Yeah, he saw how crucial water was to the West, and he predicted quite accurately that ignoring these natural boundaries would lead to conflicts.
So this idea has been brewing for a while.
It has.
But now with all the challenges we're facing, from gerrymandering to environmental degradation, it seems like this watershed concept is more relevant than ever.
Absolutely. And it's not just about fixing a broken political system.
Right.
It's about tapping into a deeper understanding of our place in the world, recognizing that we're part of these interconnected ecosystems, and that our political systems should reflect that reality.
I like that. Okay, you've painted quite a compelling picture.
Glad you think so.
But, you know, I can already hear some folks out there saying, hold on, This sounds great in theory, but what about the real world? What about those messy population imbalances and those squiggly watershed boundaries that cross state lines?
You bring up some important challenges. And it wouldn't be a deep dive if we didn't address those.
Right.
You're right. Watersheds don't care about population distribution.
Nope.
Some might be sparsely populated while others are densely packed.
Yeah.
So how do we square that with the one person, one vote principle?
Yeah. Wouldn't we end up with some districts that are way bigger than others?
Well, it would require some creative cartography, that's for sure.
I bet.
We might need to use smaller sub-watersheds as building blocks.
Okay.
Combining them in ways that balance population while still respecting those natural boundaries.
Yeah.
Think of it like assembling a puzzle.
Yeah.
Using those smaller pieces to create a larger, more equitable picture.
And what about those watersheds that sprawl across multiple states?
Yeah.
Do we start redrawing state lines after all?
Not at all.
Okay.
It would actually create some exciting opportunities for interstate cooperation.
Okay.
Imagine states working together to manage shared watersheds, aligning their policies to protect those vital resources. It could lead to a more regionally focused approach to governance, breaking down those artificial barriers that often hinder progress.
So instead of competing over water rights or passing the buck on pollution, states would be incentivized to collaborate, find solutions that benefit everyone within that shared watershed.
Exactly. It could be a catalyst for a more integrated, sustainable approach to managing our natural resources, one that transcends those arbitrary political boundaries.
Okay, I'm getting a little less skeptical, I must admit.
Good.
But what about the people?
Yeah.
Are politicians even going to go for this?
Oh.
I mean, wouldn't those who benefit from the current system, especially those who rely on gerrymandering, fight tooth and nail to keep things as they are?
There's no doubt there would be pushback, especially from those who see this as a threat to their power.
Right.
But I think we're underestimating the public's appetite for change.
Really?
People are fed up with the partisan gridlock, the lack of representation, the feeling that their voices don't matter.
I see.
This idea of aligning our political systems with the natural world. It taps into a deeper longing for a more authentic, more grounded democracy.
You're saying that this could actually be a popular reform?
I think so.
That people would see this as a way to reclaim their democracy.
Right.
To create a system that's more responsive to their needs and less beholden to special interests.
Absolutely. Think about it. If your district is defined by a watershed, the health of that ecosystem becomes central to your political discourse.
I see.
Suddenly, issues like water quality pollution and habitat restoration become front and center.
It's like it forces politicians to think more long-term, to consider the interconnectedness of things.
Right.
They can't just focus on narrow partisan issues. They have to address the needs of the entire watershed community.
Precisely, and it empowers citizens to engage in those discussions in a more meaningful way.
How so?
Imagine attending town hall meetings where people are talking about the health of their shared river. Debating solutions that benefit the entire watershed regardless of their political affiliations.
You're painting a very inspiring picture.
Glad to hear it.
And it's definitely making me rethink how we define community and representation.
Good.
But, you know, even if everyone was on board with this watershed idea, it wouldn't be a magic bullet.
Right. Of course not.
There would still be challenges, compromises, trade-offs.
There's no such thing as a perfect system.
Right.
And it's crucial to acknowledge that focusing solely on watersheds could inadvertently neglect other important factors that shape our political landscape.
You're talking about things like socioeconomic diversity, cultural communities. Those shared interests that might not be directly tied to a particular watershed.
Exactly. And that's where thoughtful design and public engagement are so crucial.
I see.
We need to make sure that any redistricting plan, whether it's based on watersheds or not, takes all of these factors into account and prioritizes fairness and representation for all communities.
So it's about finding that balance.
It is.
That sweet spot where we're honoring those natural boundaries while also ensuring that everyone's voice is heard and that all communities have a seat at the table.
Precisely. It's about creating a system that's both ecologically sound and politically equitable.
You know, all this talk about watersheds and interconnectedness is making me think about that story we touched on earlier. About those Texas utilities asking the EPA to weaken safeguards on coal ash pollution. It seems like a perfect example of how the current political system, with its gerrymandered districts and lack of accountability, can lead to decisions that prioritize corporate profits over public health and environmental protection.
It's a sobering reminder of what's at stake here.
Yeah.
When you have districts that are designed to protect incumbents and stifle competition,
right,
it creates a breeding ground for corruption and a disregard for the common good.
And it's not just about some abstract policy debate.
Right.
We're talking about real people's lives being affected by this.
Absolutely.
This coal ash contains some pretty nasty stuff.
It does.
Heavy metals like arsenic, lead, mercury that can cause cancer, heart disease, even brain damage.
It's a serious threat to public health and to the environment.
Yep.
And these utilities, they're essentially gambling with people's lives.
I see.
All in the name of profit.
And what makes it even worse is that they're trying to exploit the fact that the EPA is now under the control of an administration that's more sympathetic to industry interests than to environmental protection.
It's a classic case of regulatory capture.
Regulatory capture.
Where the fox is guarding the hen house. And it highlights why we need a system that's more resilient to these kinds of abuses. A system where politicians are accountable to the people they represent,
right,
not to the corporations that fund their campaigns.
Right. And it's not just about electing different people.
Right.
It's about changing the rules of the game.
Exactly.
Making it harder to manipulate the system for personal gain.
And that's where this watershed idea comes in.
Okay.
By aligning districts with these natural boundaries, we'd be creating a system that's inherently more resistant to gerrymandering. A system where politicians have to actually earn the votes of their constituents by addressing the issues that matter most to them.
So instead of having districts that are designed to protect incumbents and stifle competition,
right,
we have districts where politicians have to actually compete for votes.
Yeah.
Where they have to listen to the concerns of their constituents and where they're held accountable for their actions.
Exactly. And it's not just about accountability.
Okay.
It's about creating a system that's more aligned with the long-term health and well-being of our communities and our environment.
Okay. You've made a compelling case.
Good.
I'm starting to see how this seemingly radical idea could actually lead to a more democratic, more sustainable, and ultimately more just society.
That's the goal.
But let's bring this back down to earth for a moment.
Oh, okay.
How would this actually play out in this specific state, say Texas? Texas? I mean, Texas is a huge state with a diverse population and a complex political landscape.
It is.
How would watershed districts reshape the electoral map there?
That's a great question, and it just so happens that we have a fascinating case study to explore.
Oh, cool.
Let's take a look at how Texas's congressional districts might look if they were redrawn based on watershed boundaries.
Okay, so you're telling me we can actually see what Texas would look like with watershed-based districts.
We can.
I'm picturing a map right now.
Okay.
But my mind's going a little fuzzy on how those rivers and basins translate into political boundaries.
Well, imagine the iconic rivers of Texas.
Okay.
The Red River, the Colorado River, the Brazos River, not just as geographical features, but as the backbone of your political landscape.
Okay.
Imagine districts that follow those watersheds, encompassing the communities that rely on those vital water sources.
Okay. I'm starting to see it.
Good.
But Texas is also known for those sprawling gerrymandered districts that snake across the map.
Right.
Sometimes stretching hundreds of miles to pack and crack voters in ways that defy logic.
Yeah.
How would those change?
Imagine those sprawling districts broken down into more compact units, each following the natural contours of a watershed.
I see.
Instead of those long, contorted shapes designed to favor one party, you'd have districts that actually make sense geographically.
So a district that follows the Colorado River, for instance, would encompass a mix of urban, suburban, and rural communities, all connected by that shared water source.
Exactly. And think about what that would mean for political representation.
Okay.
Instead of catering to those narrow partisan extremes, candidates would have to appeal to a much broader range of interests.
Yeah.
They'd have to consider the needs of farmers and ranchers upstream.
I see.
The concerns of urban dwellers downstream, and everyone in between.
It's like each district would become a microcosm of the state.
Right.
Reflecting its diversity and forcing politicians to actually listen to the needs of all their constituents.
Exactly.
Not just those who align with their party.
Precisely. And imagine the impact on environmental policy.
Okay.
When your district is defined by a watershed, the health of that ecosystem becomes central to your political discourse.
Yeah.
Suddenly, issues like water quality pollution and habitat restoration become front and center.
Instead of being treated as separate issues, those environmental concerns would be woven into the very fabric of the political debate.
Exactly.
It's like it forces you to think more holistically, to see the connections between the economy, public health, and the environment.
Exactly. And think about the implications for those communities that have been disproportionately affected by environmental pollution.
You're talking about those communities that are often located near industrial sites, landfills, or those coal ash disposal ponds we talked about earlier.
Yes. In a watershed-based system,
Okay.
those communities would have a stronger voice in advocating for environmental justice.
I see.
Their concerns would be directly tied to the health of the entire watershed, making it harder for politicians to ignore them.
It's like it creates a built-in incentive for environmental protection.
It does.
A recognition that we're all interconnected and that what happens upstream affects everyone downstream.
And that's not just some idealistic notion.
Okay.
We've seen this play out in real-world examples.
Oh, really?
There are communities across the country that are already organizing themselves around watersheds.
Oh, wow.
Working together to address issues like water quality flood control and habitat restoration.
That's great.
They're proving that this bioregional approach can lead to real, tangible benefits.
So it's not just about drawing lines on a map.
It's not.
It's about shifting our mindset.
It is.
Recognizing that our political systems are not separate from the natural world.
Right.
That they're intertwined. And that we need to start governing accordingly.
Exactly. It's about aligning our political boundaries with the natural boundaries that sustain us. Creating a system that's more resilient, more equitable, and ultimately more in tune with the long-term health of our communities and our planet.
Okay, I'm sold. This watershed idea is not just intriguing, it's inspiring.
Right.
It's a vision of a future where our political systems work in harmony with the natural world, where our elected officials are accountable to the people they represent.
Yes.
And where our communities are united by a shared sense of purpose and responsibility.
And it's a vision that's within our reach.
That's encouraging.
It starts with awareness.
Okay.
With conversations like this, with people getting excited about the possibilities and demanding change from their elected officials.
So what can our listeners do to make this happen? Where do we even begin?
First, explore your own watershed.
Okay.
Go online, check out the Watershed Boundary Dataset.
Watershed Boundary Dataset.
And see where you fit into this intricate web of interconnectedness.
Okay.
Then start talking about it. Share this idea with your friends, your family, your neighbors. Contact your elected officials and let them know that you support redistricting reform, that you want a system that's fair, representative, and aligned with the natural world.
So it's about taking action at both the individual and the collective level.
It is.
It's about changing the conversation, shifting the narrative, and demanding a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Precisely. And remember, this isn't just about redrawing lines on a map. It's about redrawing the boundaries of what's possible.
I like that.
It's about creating a system that reflects our values, our aspirations, and our deep connection to the natural world.
That's a powerful thought to end on. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
It's been an eye-opening and truly inspiring conversation.
It's been great talking with you, too.
And to our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and maybe even inspired you to get involved in the movement for a more just and sustainable future. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world.